Welcome to Poetry Club. Today we discuss the poetry of Irish poet Seamus Heaney. It's one of Ron's favorite poets, and he's also hosting the discussion. So let's get right into it.
I'm going to suggest, by way of getting into him, I suspect we'll spend more than one meeting on his poems. I don't know if you all had a chance to read the article from the Poetry Foundation, but I'd like to start by reading passages from it so that we will be kind of literally and figuratively on the same page. Mm-hmm. And then I'd like to make a couple comments about the poems that I chose. It's turned out that they are really a kind of fortunate selection from his work. And I did not suspect that when I chose them. And so I'll start by doing what I just said. Seamus Heaney is widely recognized. First of all, I love the name Seamus. It's a tag name for a poet who is going to tell us about, point out, reveal for us where our society is limited. And I've always thought Boris was another good tag name for a poet.
Seamus
Heaney is widely recognized as one of the major poets of the 20th century. He was the author of over 20 volumes of poetry and criticism, edited several widely used anthologies. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995 for works and wonderful phrases to explain the selection. Works of lyrical beauty and ethical depth, which exalt everyday miracles and the living past. Taught at Harvard, 85 to 06, and was Oxford Professor of Poetry. I've got Blake Morrison's book. Michael got it for me. And he says that Heaney is that rare thing, a poet rated highly by critics and academics, yet popular with the common reader. Part of his popularity stems from his subject matter, modern Northern Ireland, its farms and cities beset with civil strife, its natural culture and language overrun by English rule. The New York Review of Books essayist Richard Murphy described Heaney as the poet who has shown the finest art in presenting a coherent vision of Ireland, past and present. When I read these passages, I think that a poet of this stature and with this talent draws on the poetic abilities of people who write about him. Heaney's poetry is known for its oral beauty and finely wrought textures. Often described as a regional poet, he is also a traditionalist. He was born and raised in Castledown, County Derry, Northern Ireland. The impact of his surroundings and the details of his upbringing on his work are immense. As a Catholic in Protestant Northern Ireland, he once described himself as someone who has emerged from a buried life and entered the realm of education. Eventually studying English at Queen's University, Heaney was especially moved by artists who created poetry out of their local and native backgrounds. Examples: Ted Hughes, Patrick Kavanagh, and Robert Frost. Recalling his time in Belfast, Heaney once noted, "I learned that my local County Derry childhood experience, which I had considered archaic and irrelevant to the modern world, was to be trusted." That resonates so strongly for me, being from Buffalo, which I've always thought it was good to be from a place that doesn't think highly of it. So they taught me that trust and helped me to articulate it. Heaney's work has always been most concerned with the past, even his earliest poems of the 1960s. According to Morrison, a general spirit of reverence toward the past helped Heaney resolve some of his awkwardness about being a writer. He could serve his own community by preserving in literature its customs and crafts, yet simultaneously gain access to a larger community of letters. I don't want to read everything. Heaney makes you see, hear, smell, taste this life, which in his words is not provincial but parochial. A wonderful distinction. I have never really made a distinction myself between those two concepts. So I'll read it again. He makes you see, hear, smell, taste this life, which in his words is not provincial but parochial. Provincialism hits at the minor or the mediocre, but all parishes, rural or urban, are equal as communities of the human spirit. As a poet from Northern Ireland, Heaney used his work to reflect upon the Troubles, a very standard term that the Irish use about the turmoil in their country. The often violent political struggles that plagued the country during Heaney's young adulthood. The poet sought to weave the ongoing Irish troubles into a broader historical frame. While some reviewers criticized him for being an apologist and mythologizer, Morrison suggested that Heaney would never reduce political situations to false simple clarity, and never thought his role should be as a political spokesman. The author has written poems directly about the Troubles, as well as elegies for friends and acquaintances who have died in them. He has tried to discover a historical framework in which to interpret the current unrest, and he has taken on the mantle of public spokesman, someone looked to for comment and guidance. Yet he has also shown signs of deeply resenting this role, defending the right of poets to be private and apolitical, and questioning the extent to which poetry, however committed, can influence the course of history. In his later work, one of the critics says, the younger Heaney wrote like a man possessed by demons, even though when those demons were very literary demons. The older Heaney seems to wonder bemusedly, what sort of demon has he become himself? I think I'll leave off there, although there's much more very wonderful things in the article. And there are other passages that, as we go along and discuss the poems, that I'd like to look at. The poems that I sent out, I have taught for a number of years the poem Digging. The admiration it expresses for his father, and the resolve that early on I read the poem as a poem with resolve about his satisfaction with the profession that he had chosen. Then I discovered Follower, and I thought they were such a wonderful pairing. But I had to teach the two poems for a number of years before I realized how rich they were, and how the resolution itself in Digging becomes somewhat questioned. And Follower is a much more complex poem than I thought it was when I started teaching it early on.
Okay, we're going to start with Digging.
Yes. I would love to read it, and
Please do.
I will. Digging. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean, rasping sound when the spade sinks into the gravelly ground. My father digging, I look down. Till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the braid edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man can handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. I just love that single little couplet that brags about his grandfather if it stands alone. Once I carried him milk in a bottle corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing. neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it.
It has such amazing imagery, and you can really feel that connection he has with his father and his grandfather.
But he has no spade to follow. Those men who came before him. He distinguishes himself in his separateness, solidifies it at the end. I love that. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it.
In all the times I've taught this poem, I know that one word I have never pointed to is roots. And Blake Morrison makes a great deal in analyzing Heaney's poetry about the division from his heritage and his own intellectual life. And he does it by pairing the two words, his roots and his reading.
Yeah.
And he uses the word roots a couple of times in the poem.
Yeah.
And especially that one line, through living roots awaken in my head, toward the end.
Wow. I like that. I also noticed that in the paired poem, as I guess we're calling it, Follower, has a similar ending. I love that build up, and then boom, this great epiphany, a self analysis there at the end. Boom.
I'm going to guess that came at real pain, though. He is so different from the grandfather and father he admired, and we're going to see more of that in Follower.
I was thinking the same thing. I mean, I thought it was a difficult choice that he had to make. So he has this pride and respect for his father and his grandfather, which comes out here, but then to make the choice that he's going to be a poet. And I wonder how that translated into not just his family, but his the network, the place that he lived, and how that probably made him feel somewhat of a stranger in a place that he grew up in, because once he decided to go this route, he has to separate those roots. Take that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the life of intellectual will-be poet college person could have been very difficult with the father and the grandfather. We don't know that from here, but I just... what I'm reading into it is that when he says, I'll dig with it, there was a lot of thought that went into that's how I'll dig.
I agree with you. I think this is his reconciling with being that different person and still being, honoring or being respectful about, his father and his grandfather. And I think that goes back to what Ron was saying in that first part about how he realized that being in Kerry was something that really helped him get to this point.
I'm sure that Heaney probably had a lot of comment from people in his life about, especially because his poetry takes it on so fully, his choice to leave the farm or leave agriculture, leave his heritage. I wonder if he would not feel tempted to reply that it wasn't a choice, that you get drawn out of that life. At least that's the way I felt about my life. If I had stayed in Buffalo and not gone to the university, I'd have been a cop in Buffalo. That's what my family did. I can't even think about what that would have been like. And And I think that
Hmm.
is part of, and Emery, I think you were kind of pointing it out, that it's a very challenging set of options to simply take them on and feel that this is the right use of his time on Earth.
I want to go back to his comments too, and the ones that you just made. There was a time when I was not embarrassed. I was disappointed that I came from small Midwest farm-oriented town. I thought that was so uninteresting. I can remember particularly when Jesse Jackson was fighting it out with Michael Dukakis for the nomination for, the run for president. And their story seemed so interesting and mine so bland. So I am liking Heaney, saying, no, he realizes that this is rich. There's much to be learned from the farm and farm folk and from moldy potatoes. And
Maybe that's why you and I hooked up, as we both come from small, bland hometowns.
I'm sure that was the attraction.
I'm sure that was it.
But Emery, my own version of what you just said is, for years and years, I had to convince myself I belonged in the university because of my own. My father was a truck driver. Everyone worked in the grain mills or in construction in Buffalo, and I didn't feel prepared. Wonderful things in it. Great, the detail that with which he captures the skill, even the prowess, and so succinctly. But he trains our eye. He really directs our eye to capture in a few phrases his father's skill, and it's all very convincing.
I appreciate when a poet can, in just a few words, create a picture for me. But I am appreciating too that Heaney is taking a bit more time to build the picture. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt edge of it, cuts of an edge. This is going to sound show-offy again, but when we left Glasgow, we spent 2 weeks in Ireland. We stood by peat bogs, and there's a particular smell, and I can smell them when I'm reading this poem. It's cold and damp feeling, and I love the word pictures he's creating.
Well, and for all the times any of us have handled potatoes when they come out of the ground, and remembering that as a kid, as kids, scattering new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. Wow.
Yeah.
I also think that anytime an Irish writer, or maybe particularly a poet, is talking about potato, it's loaded. That's unfortunate, but it's loaded with more meaning than just a potato. The potato, the reliance on potato often is the only food. Then the potato famine is a palpable bit of history that you still feel when you're in Ireland.
Yeah.
So the potato is more important than I think. I mean, I love potatoes in most every way, but I think in Ireland they're seen as more bread of life kind of feeling.
Have any of you read Tim Egan's book, Immortal Irishman?
No.
Yes.
Just a deeply researched account of the potato famine and of the subject of his books. I think Patrick, I won't say it right, Eamon, who came to the United States and was a hero in the Civil War, etc. Very worth reading. The British let the Irish starve, even with the granaries right there in Ireland, because they didn't believe that they could simply give them the food they needed to feed their families. And not an overstatement. Something I didn't realize before I read it.
In the sixth stanza, I was just realizing this when you guys were talking, was, he gives his father that milk in a bottle. His father drinks it and fell right away, nicking and slying, neatly heaving the sods. I mean, his father didn't really have any choice. I mean, in his own lifetime of what he was going to do, he was going to be this person working out in these bogs, where Heaney had this opportunity to become into that, or go to the college. Because Ron let me use his book here. In 1947, Northern Ireland Education Act enabled access to higher education for children of poorer families, which enables Heaney to attend St. Colum's College in Derry as a boarder on a scholarship, and then later to attend Queen Anne. So, I mean,
wow.
What his dad did here, though, was he took this on. He took this purpose in life on seriously, and he knew right away. All he could do is drink the milk, and then he goes right back to heaving sod.
Mm-hmm. I've always enjoyed this poem. The parts that I've picked out as my favorites is the concept of his work ethic is going to match his grandfather's and his father's. Is what I get out of it. That he's going to be diligent with his writing, just like his father and his grandfather were so diligent. And I especially enjoy the fact that you can eat a potato, it's nourishment, and that peat is used to heat a house, and that you can get a type of nourishment and a type of warmth sometimes from writing, especially reading it. And then also a livelihood, if you're lucky, if you're fortunate enough as a writer. So the correlations on that level I've always found really interesting. And I just imagine him expressing that he's going to be as diligent and as serious with his writing as the men in his life have been with what they've had to do.
I kept thinking about the poet as a young boy, and over how many years did he watch his father dig, and how long did it take for the images to grow in the soil of his mind, so to speak, so that they come full formed into this poem. I have to think that this is not something he conjured up just over seeing his father dig a few times.
Yeah. But he has many, many lectures and critical essays about the agency of poetry. And just the very process that you're talking about, Linda, what it means for us, especially in sorting the past and coming to some kind of resolution. One of the things that the poem, I love that spot in the beginning. We've all experienced this phenomenon where we watch something and then conjure out of it a memory, and it transforms. So I look down till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, snooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. That it's moving for me. I can hardly read it and keep emotion out of my voice. It just conjures up so many memories of my grandmother in the garden, etc.
I'm just getting, this is so great, although I really appreciate everyone's comments. I was thinking, thank you, Mike, for sharing that about that the grant money that went towards folks of a lower income to have access to colleges, to courses. And there's so many underrepresented voices out there that have something to share. And I'm just so thankful that he went to college and he shared this life, with this little window, into his world. And there's so many other people like him that need to share their world.
Well, when we read Rena's poetry, the way she uses her heritage, just delves into it, and draws out what's just the selection process. What is valuable there?
Right. Well, I'd like to do the follower next, because they do pair up and they have very similar ending, which would emphasize my earlier point and make me appear a lot more intelligent.
So you want to read it?
Pardon me?
Go ahead and read it, Jen.
Oh, all right. I will try. I will do my best. Okay. Follower. My father worked with a horse and plow. His shoulders gobbed like a full sail strung between the shafts and the furrow. The horses strained at his clicking tongue. An expert, he would set the wing and fit the bright steel-pointed sock. The sod rolled over without breaking at the head rig with a single pluck. Of the reins, the sweating team turned round and back into the land. His eye narrowed and angled at the ground, mapping the furrow exactly. I stumbled into his hobnailed walk, fell sometimes on the polished sod. Sometimes he rode me on his back, dipping and rising into the plod. I wanted to grow up and plow. Close one eye, stiffen my arm. All I did was follow in his broad shadow round the farm. It was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping always. But today, it is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. Boom, great ending.
I'm not sure what the ending means, and if it means what I think it does, it's a really sad ending.
No, I think it's comforting. Let's talk about that.
Sure. I'm reading it. I'm reading those last four lines. In that, well, maybe it's just an image in his mind, but I was reading it literally that the father is no longer physically able. He can only stumble behind.
Mhm.
Oh, I read it like the father's memory or the father's ghost. Stumbling, I can see where, the word stumbling might makes it feel like it's more physical, but behind me and will not go away. That feels like a influence or memory.
Either way, with the word stumbling in it, it's haunting to me.
I think he is haunted by his father, but I don't feel that it's a sad thing. I think it's a good thing. It's a good he likes it. I think I don't
Okay,
know.
I need to hear somebody else because I don't see the happy side of it.
I wouldn't say happy. I'll say sorry about that. I won't say happy. I'll say I'll say comforting. it's just a constant reminder.
When I first discovered the poem and decided I was going to teach it along with digging, I thought there was a good deal of ambiguity in the last lines, but that the primary meaning was that his impatience with his father, and yet his father is there. His father is such a fact in his life. And so there was a mixed acknowledgement and also the reversal of the father enduring his boyhood antics. And now he, like all father-son reversals, there's this wonderful, famous one in Sings The Playboy of the Western World, where they reverse roles at the end of the play. But a reversal of roles.
Mm-hmm.
There's a not a long passage, but there's a passage in Morrison's book that I hope I'd like to leave time to read to the group before we close off today, before Linda leaves, about these two poems.
You want to read that now?
Yeah.
Well, I'm willing to. I'm happy to.
I'm kind of with Amory about will not go away, because will not go away sounds like I'm not happy he won't go away. It's not that he is he's an ever willing, attentive father, but I don't think the grown-up wants that father there.
Okay, I'll read it. In Follower, the father is seen at work, plowing silent and remote. The only sound he makes is his clicking tongue, while the yapping son desperately follows him about. The adult's skill at mapping the furrow exactly is contrasted with the clumsiness of the child, only for this order of things to be reversed at the end. The poem brings visually alive the figure of speech about a son following in his father's footsteps, and its reversal at the end carries a possible double meaning. We can take it literally that the father is now old and clinging, or metaphorically that the son is a writer, I love this, is shackled with his father as poetic subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that great?
Yeah.
Whichever the reading, though, we are again struck more by distance than intimacy. Not only do father and son have different skills, they're at the height of their powers. The dilemma of following is not fully resolved in digging either, but comes closer to being. This is the best known and most widely anthologized of all Heaney's poems. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pun rests. It is the real interest of the image is that it seems to be overcompensating for the poet's shame at departing from lineage. The Heaneys had been associated with County Derry since Gaelic times, and the poet is only too aware of the father standing behind his father. By God, the old man could handle a spade. Heaney's assertion at the end, I'll dig with it, has not quite the conviction he intends, but it is the best case he can mount in his first two books. These are not then poems of simple fidelity to the Derry countryside, but poems anxious whether such fidelity is possible, and if so, at what cost. Far from enjoying some untroubled closeness to his home ground, Heaney feels torn between his roots and his reading, between words of the heart and hearth language he has learned, public, social, acceptable language of school and salon. And I'm really convinced that that's not an over-reading of the poems. I think Morrison really captures the depth and how much is symbolized and suggested in their vocations.
So, Ron, what's your interpretation of those last 4 lines?
Did you leave out the word happily shackled together? Did you read that? He's
Trying to be funny. Yes.
Thank you for double checking though, Ron. I appreciate it.
I think he is, like in digging, found his own way. But none of us can be free from our past. And it looms.
Yeah. I think I understand that now differently, particularly because of what you just said about our own past loom. Whatever our relationships are with the figures in that past, parents or whomever, they do remain. They will not go away. So it could be, we don't exactly know what his emotion is, but he has persistent sense of what has happened before.
You've all read my little poem about my father's drinking. When all is said, and when I talk about this with my sister, there were 6 of us, 4 have died, and now it's my younger sister and me. And we get together, we talk. This will probably sound like a strange comment, but I have to reckon with it. I love my father. And for all I saw and for all I dealt with, the challenges of having him in the house, etc., I don't know how to explain what I even mean when I say I loved him. All that brings into the discussion and the experience of it. So I hear so much regard and awe of his father and his grandfather in the 2 poems.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And his shoulders looming like a sail. I mean, he just subsumes the whole scene. There's just along with everything else, such an attempt by Heaney to come to grips with who he is, and in their shadow.
Going back to the poem Digging, you commented when you were reading it, those 4 lines, my God, by God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. I mean, there's the respect. There's the lineage and the respect. Particularly starting out by God. Just by God, what giants they were.
Yeah. Yeah. The awe.
Which would make the to have those 2 colossus in your background, then however he means it, but to use the word stumbling behind me, that to me just makes me sad. It's such a diminishment of that guy and the grandfather who could outcut anyone else in the county.
These are early poems in Heaney's work, and I think probably his father was still alive, both his father and his mother. Both their deaths just shook him powerfully. And I know that our whole discussion does, in fact, yield this. They're just such a wonderful pairing, the 2 poems, for an exploration of his past and of the choice he's made in his life. We can read them as tributes to his father and grandfather, and even critiques. I could be persuaded that the essential question in both poems is, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Particularly the first, but
Hmm. Wow.
Hmm.
Emery, were you about to say something?
Well, I am, but I don't know what it is. Well, in digging, he starts in the present, and even if we didn't know he was a writer, he tells us he's a writer. He tells us that. And so we've got the tension between what he's chosen to do and what his father and grandfather did. In Follower, we don't get that sense. We don't know if he's happy as a writer. We don't get any feeling of that. What we get is, I wanted to grow up and plow, to close one eye. All I ever did was follow in his shadow. And he doesn't really let us know that he made a very different choice in that one. Doesn't really let us know how he has reconciled. Well, we don't know that he's made a different choice. That's not part of that second poem.
Yeah, we have to make assumptions again.
The article in Poetry Foundation has a passage in it that I think worth looking at. And this is about Heaney's prose. Heaney's Finders Keepers Selected Prose, 1971 to 2001, earned the Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism, the largest annual prize for literary criticism in the English language. John Carey in the London Sunday Times proposed that Heaney's is not just another book of literary criticism. It is a record of Seamus Heaney's 30-year struggle with the demon of doubt. The questions that afflict him are basic. What is the good of poetry? How can it contribute to society? Is it worth the dedication it demands? Heaney himself described his essays as testimonies to the fact that poets themselves are finders and keepers, that their vocation is to look after art and life by being discoverers and custodians of the unlooked for. And I think, Emery, your word sad, that it makes you sad and it sounds sad, I think that this is because we hear his struggle with his identity as a poet. And yet he keeps writing some of the most magnificent poems, in the language.